got an original.
I thought I might cut away at some point to show some stuff on a browser, but we can start like this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really have that much to talk about tonight. I had all these good intentions, but I do have a lot of news. You know, I sort of padded this out with news items.
Cool. That's always good.
Yeah.
Well, you only have to give this talk, what, maybe 6 times a year?
Something like that.
Why not? Yeah, it's pretty much what I do for my day job. So
Bob, I'm Dave Cromer, the treasurer, and here in a few days, I'm going to send out emails on everybody that's done membership.
Okay.
So since you're here, the check that you wrote's probably cleared, but I just want to let you know I did get your membership check.
Okay.
And then Tony.
As we say, welcome aboard our sinking ship. It's not sinking, it's stellar.
can be both.
You spell your name C-A-S-T?
A-N-E-D-A.
Okay, yeah. No, I haven't gotten this year's membership yet, if you're still wanting to join this
Yes,
year.
I do. I'm not sure that I can take cash.
Oh, wait a minute. I haven't updated this. Did you do through PayPal?
Through PayPal.
Okay,
Okay,
yes,
yeah.
yes, I've gotten it. Yeah, we're good. I'm sorry. I haven't updated the membership yet. On the ones I've got through
Keep
PayPal.
up on my memberships. I've got
No, we're good. Thank
Part of
you.
the Audubon Society too.
They all
Ham
come,
radio,
yeah, I know.
so.
I think I sent
I've got yours.
good one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the one
I,
that saves
been
money for your-
procrastinating it, and I figured with the board meeting up, then I've got to get it all together for the board meeting, and I'll email everybody on their membership.
Yeah, yeah. I thought Mark might come over this evening, but he's not. But he'll be. The board meeting's just online, right?
That's what I hear. Is that right? This board meeting is just online. So that's why I was kind of hoping to get signatures tonight. So.
That's actually kind of good for me. You know.
Eat right, exercise, die anyway.
You know, that's the thing, is it doesn't matter a whole lot what you do, you're gonna go that way, right? Doesn't matter what you can do between now and then.
I think we need to see the screen, but you know, nobody wants to look at me.
I can move it to wherever you want.
It's whatever works best.
I just figure out that's happened and John's up there. Are you doing this on, are you setting this up?
Are you doing this?
We are on.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, good.
I'll leave it so you can kind of see.
So I
it.
can kind of monitor that.
How do you have everything going? You have it going on Zoom and on, whatchamacallit, YouTube or just YouTube?
I think it's only on YouTube right now, right? Well, I know a couple of people that are watching, at least I hope so. See if we can
Several
get
said
this.
they would. Oh.
Okay. Is the sound okay?
Yep.
Should we go ahead and start then? Do we want to wait to see if anybody else kind of shows up?
Up to you.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and start then? So, first of all, welcome, everybody. This is the first meeting we've had really since for the year, so it's kind of nice to get off to a good start here. Do we need some introductions? We've got a new member. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Bob Schmidt, 40 plus years in Topeka, worked for Dell Technologies. Recently decided to jump into astrophotography. I'm looking for someone to share experiences with and try to get educated, see how far I can take this thing.
Okay. Well, as you and I have been in kind of corresponding, so as I pointed out, we got a number of members that might be able to kind of help you with that. Russ, of course, would be one. Kyle might be another one to Kyle Pickens.
But he's not in town, but he could help online or Zoom meetings and stuff like that. What kind of telescope do you use?
C11.
Oh, you have good.
Plus C11 Edge HD.
Wow. So that'd be amazing photography coming out of there.
Still box showed up yesterday.
All right. You got all new stuff.
The mount comes in tomorrow, so it's,
Yeah.
blood pressure's going up a little. Wasn't expecting the mount for about 30 days, and they said, hey, it's on its way, and it's like, oh, geez.
Doesn't it
Yeah.
usually work the other way around? You expect it and then it shows up 30 days late?
Yeah, I know the supply problems have been major in this hobby, if you will.
Do you have a place you're going to put it, or are you just going to set
I've
it up?
got two boys that live just outside of town, and both of them, sky rating is a 3. And I've talked to a number of folks that drive 2.5 hours to get to anywhere close to a 3. So
Where are they located?
one of them's at 189th, and the other one is a little bit
That's my zone back in there.
west of Ottawa.
Mm.
We go out there and see one of the grandkids, and it's black on black, and
Oh, yeah.
it's gorgeous, gorgeous country.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's where my dad grew up, was down around there, and I got stuck, coming home on Sunday nights, and the other kids are asleep in the back seat, and I'm looking out there, look at all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
See, I live 149th, so I'm not.
149th?
I'm a little too close to the peak, but I was still in the 4.
Yeah.
But barely.
But your southern skies are good.
Southern
Peak
skies
is
are
north
pretty
of you.
decent. That's because I don't have much to the south.
Yeah, and I live in a -2, so.
I was able to get 22nd magnitude there let's see, 2 nights ago. 2 mornings. With a 30% moon still up in the air.
Wow.
So any announcements, anything that anybody wants to share?
Introduce.
Introduce yourself.
Mine's Tony Castaneda.
And this is not the first time you've been with
No,
us,
no,
right?
I've been a member for 10 years.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah.
I knew we'd met previously.
Mhm.
Announcements, anybody? Anything that you want to share? I'm sitting here watching this monitor, and it's probably about 3 seconds behind.
Yeah.
So, I see what I did a few seconds back.
I don't know any more information, but I'm guessing that we're gonna get the 27-inch mirror somewhere mid-February, so about
Okay.
3 weeks maybe from now.
So that particular mirror, Bob, will be in our club's main observatory site, which is out near Eskridge. Have you been out there yet?
I've seen it, but I've seen it on Facebook.
Yeah, we're in the process of kind of changing the optical characteristics of the main telescope so that it'll be shorter and it won't be subject to the wind quite as much. And that involved a brand new mirror, which must be pretty close to being done if they're planning on.
He said he was in polishing stage, but he had just started the polishing stage, so it says it usually takes a couple weeks
I'm sorry, Russ.
to
I
get that.
tried to get the angle a little better, and I think I messed up the camera.
Almost did it.
It's not as square as it was. So
Tombow
I'm
is
sorry.
2005, I think that's when we had an operation.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, 'cause I was gonna say, I joined in 2006.
But if it's figured as well as your new mirror is, or your
Yeah.
old,
Right.
your
My old
redesigned old
yes.
mirror, then we should be getting some amazing difference.
I'm hoping that's the case. I really have the thought of when this mirror comes in, just ship it to the guy that did my mirror, ship it to him and have him check
Yeah.
and see how good it is.
Yeah.
Because I want to know early on.
Yes.
Can they
Right.
ship it to that guy so we don't have to double ship it?
Good.
Say, hey, could you check this over?
Uh-huh.
Might be pretty obvious what we're into then, but,
Yeah, if we have to send it back to the guy to say, hey, you're
yeah.
pretty far off.
Yeah, well, I think he's probably gonna be fine. I'm not too worried about that. He may not be as good as Lockwood, but I think he's probably one of the upper optical places.
Have you worked on the ones they could trust you know, the part that you're gonna set.
What's the
something up
next
on
members night?
The metal version.
Oh,
Something
no, I
like
haven't
that.
done anything with the tube.
Yeah.
The telescope tube.
Sometime
I haven't done anything with the
coming
tube
up,
yet. We're kind of waiting to the very,
Some
kind
of
of
the
close to
upcoming events.
getting it in. That way we don't, because John's not really.
I was just wondering if Casey wanted to come out
Yeah, you
to
wouldn't have that done for you.
Farpoint and see.
Yeah.
Well, we got a public night scheduled for April 23rd, but I think a members night would be,
Have to check it.
I think we have a members night before then, don't we?
yeah, I think so.
It's on the calendar for Groups IO.
Okay, well, some of the, just to kind of bring everybody up to date, some of the upcoming events that we've got. Obviously, today's the general meeting, which you know about because you're here. The next one's the 24th. Our first, I guess our next public night will be the 23rd, but when is the next members night?
One second.
Can't remember.
What's the difference? What's a public astronomy night?
A public night is one where the public is invited.
Sure.
So we pass the word that people who are not members of the club can come out to Farpoint. And usually there's some kind of, I wouldn't exactly say a program, but there are people who are manning the various telescopes that have, you know, particular objects inside. Dan usually does a kind of a presentation on the sky.
Yeah.
Members
Show 'em the
nights.
constellations and stuff like that.
And members nights are open to members and invited guests of members. They're more free form. People can bring their own telescopes if they'd like. If there's a kind of a concrete platform out at the observatory that if you wanted to bring your own telescope out and set it up, it's a good place for that. There's also the club scopes. There's a 12-inch telescope in the Kessler building that Gary was telling you about earlier. That's available for club use. The Tombaugh sometimes gets fired up for that. doesn't
Yeah,
it?
I think, although I think we've kind of backed away from using that. We a lot of times may use that for show and tell, for showing what we're doing with NEOS, for example, that sort of thing. But we don't have to go actually look through it much anymore. It's just too long and too much of a wind catch.
Yeah.
And we don't, having people up on a 14-foot ladder is kind of scary.
And mounting and unmounting the camera kind of has some
Yeah.
issues
right.
involved with it too. So
Yeah.
so one of the major things that the club does is a program in NEO, near Earth orbiting near Earth objects. That's one of the things that Gary and Dave work a lot on, and that telescope is mainly used for that. So it's used for kind of
Yeah. One of the
basically.
reasons we kind of established member nights, just so we have a time when members could come out and do their own thing. You know, with help from other members or whatever, just kind of like, the old club party kind of an idea. Which is really nice because especially, hey, what'd you do with this? Look what I've got. How'd you do that? That kind of stuff. It's really kind of a neat little, I always like them.
Yeah, don't really have that chance on public nights because
Yeah.
we're so busy with the public that's out there and kind of trying to put on a show and stuff like that. So. But it's nice to we have members come out on public nights to help work with the public. And sometimes that's an issue. So we like to have members with all variety of experience come out on public nights just to help and learn or
Well, they bring their own scopes too, and
Yeah.
have people look through their scopes.
Right.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of a win-win. for
and that's a really important because even though we run the 12-inch and maybe one more scope, to have something for the public to look through and see visually is really important. So we've been lucky the last few public nights we've had 2 to 3, 4 other scopes out from members. So it's been nice.
Yeah, and of course, it all obviously depends on sky conditions. So, usually kind of recommend that people watch the club website and just to see what the current status of that is.
A year. That's
Well, it seems like there's been some pretty good skies lately.
Yeah, there's been some nights, yeah. Up until the time I got my mirror back.
And then the clouds immediately showed up, right? Okay, so moving on, I guess. Had a few news items. I have to kind of confess here that when I sort of set up this idea or thought about this idea of talking about software, I sort of got lost in all of it because there's so much. And I ended up not having that much really to talk about. So in order to kind of get it, in order to sort of pad this out a little bit, I added a bunch of news items, which, I thought maybe would be kind of interest.
Yeah.
Probably for me, the most interesting one, right, the thing that happened recently is that the James Webb Telescope, which we had a presentation of, a few months ago, is now in its final place. So it's made the journey on out to the location where it's going to be. It's all deployed now. All the sun shields are deployed and the mirror is deployed. And, all these things that I think probably were, causing the professional astronomy community to lose a lot of sleep has now happened, which I'm sure is going to be
Although there's a
a
couple
relief
more
to them.
months of things
Yeah.
that have to be
They are still not out of the woods yet.
Yeah,
They've got to,
sure.
they've got to kind of make sure that the data stream is correct.
But the
And,
big things they were worried about was.
but the really big things, it all worked out, which is
Right.
pretty amazing for a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't think they've ever tried to do anything quite this complicated in terms of a deployment of a remote telescope before. And secondly, there's no way to practice any of this. You can't build a big simulator to do something like this. So I'm sure it was kind of white knuckle time for them, but knock wood, it seems like things are going well. I actually got to kind of reading some of the articles on this just because I thought it was interesting. There's some stuff I guess I knew but never really thought too much about. One of them is, where this thing actually is. It has to go out past the orbit of the moon, of course, but I didn't realize that it's actually orbiting around this second libation point, this kind of gravitational dead spot out there. And that was sort of interesting for me to kind of learn. And the other thing was that it takes kind of a weird way to get there. They don't just send this thing off in a big rocket and straight out to wherever it's going. It follows what's called a Lissajous orbit, which I don't know if you ever took any sort of mechanics class, but Lissajous figures are what you get when you have a rotation on top of a rotation, basically. It's actually, I don't know, it used to be grinding mirrors was all about getting a proper Lissajous figure. So anyway, it follows what's called a Lissajous orbit, which if you look at it from the top, it's kind of this loopy orbit here that eventually gets it to where it can swing out, get deflected by the moon, and make it out to this kind of gravitational dead spot out in space where it's going to be permanently located. So I thought that just the complexity of all this, really kind of boggles my mind, that they can send this thing out there and by giving it little nudges here and there, get it to follow this path.
It's sitting out there at 15th magnitude, by the way, if anybody wants to take a look.
I've seen quite a few pictures of it. People have, that sunshade on it is really big and really reflecty. So I imagine it shows up.
It sunshades about the size of multiple tennis courts.
I saw a picture of a mock-up of it somewhere sitting in a park in like New York City or something, and they had it on, and it was like, God, it looks like a tennis court. This thing is enormous. The other thing I thought was, I kind of knew, but had never really thought about was, how this thing is sort of keeping station out there. And, this idea that it's on these libation or these Lagrangian points. And I remember calculating stuff like this once upon a time back in my college days. But I like this picture here because it kind of shows what all that stuff really means. These lines that are on here are lines of constant gravitational force. And you can kind of, the balance of gravitational forces between all these various bodies. And I think the reason why it has to orbit one of these has to do with that stability. If it just sat there at the actual Lagrangian
It
point.
follows the moon cycle.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what's compensating for.
So anyway, I thought that was just, I liked this. I don't know where I saw this little image, but I really liked it because it shows that, there are these lines of force out there and that this is kind of sitting in a sort of a dead spot created by the interaction of all these various gravitational bodies. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a nice diagram.
So that was one news thing. This is another one. Anybody hear about this? Terry, you probably have.
Yeah.
This is, I had no idea that this was happening until I got I get a little NASA news feed. And this popped up in it. This was the NEA Scout mission. Apparently this has been on tap for a while now. It's scheduled to be launched on the very first Artemis mission, which I believe is scheduled to launch in March, about the middle of March, which, given NASA's tendency to slip timelines, that may or may not happen. But Artemis is the kind of next generation NASA rocketry program, and it includes boosters and spacecraft and eventually a moon lander. If we manage to mount some more moon missions, it'll go through the Artemis program. But this particular little nanosat, or whatever it is they call it, is kind of a secondary payload for the first Artemis mission. And it's this tiny little satellite. It's, I don't know, about the size of a suitcase probably, that they will send out with some imaging equipment on it. They're going to image this one near-Earth asteroid. The near-Earth asteroid that they're going to actually image is 2020 GE. Gary, do you know if it's ever been imaged?
I'm looking that up.
Right at the moment, it's not visible at our latitude.
I'm just checking to see if maybe Gary or I caught it and turned in data on it.
Yeah, and it's quite small. Actually, this is one of the things that's pretty interesting about this particular mission is that, there's been missions to asteroids before, but they've all been relatively large asteroids on the order of, probably hundreds of meters in diameter or larger. This one's something like, I don't know, the most frequent comparison is to a bus, like a school bus.
Well, yeah.
So this is a pretty small thing, and almost nothing is known about these objects that are this small, and yet, as we all know, they not only are a lot of scientific significance, but they also have some, practical significance as well. If one of these things comes through our atmosphere and hits us, it's kind of a bad day. So it's going to be return a lot of really useful science information. So here's some of the information about it. It's what's called an Apollo asteroid. I found maybe I don't know if I can do this or not. I found a website that I thought was really cool. Let me see if I can bring this thing up here. Shoot, where's my browser?
You have a bunch of stuff down here,
Oh, okay.
right? It's just a little bit too low.
Here we go. Yeah, I couldn't figure out how to get that to sit any lower than that. There was this little animation you can see here of various Apollo asteroids, and you can see there's quite a few of these things. And some of them were pretty famous, like Icarus, for example, is kind of a famous one. But the thing I thought was really cool about this particular diagram is, first of all, it kind of shows these Apollo objects, which are Earth-crossing objects, and you can kind of see Earth is in here somewhere, right there. So there's us. The thing I thought was really cool about this is, you typically, if you see a depiction of the solar system in a book, or even on it's always like the sun and then the planets, and it looks like this. First of all, mostly empty, and secondly, very sort of orderly looking thing. And the reality of it is this kind of cloud of crap that's floating around out there, and there's a few bigger pieces of it, and we happen to be on one of those. But it kind of illustrates the fact that there's a lot of stuff out there, and so anyway, I thought this was a very, really interesting depiction of all this. This was a site that just called Apollo class asteroids. So I sat there and stared at this for a long time just because it was, I thought, pretty interesting.
I've got an Apollo in there somewhere.
Is there? Yeah. Well, I think right now, I think this 2020 GE is below. We're at our latitude. We can't see it. It's right now. It's in the constellation, and I struggle with this pronunciation, Monoceros.
Oh.
So which I think is below our horizon. So if you look up its current declination, it's a negative number. So it's
Actually, it's up just later in the.
Click on
Yeah,
current slide,
yeah, you can-
second one
On the end.
from the
Second
left.
icon.
There you go.
I don't use this kind of software. So anyway, so this was one I thought was kind of cool for a lot of reasons. And the other thing I thought was kind of cool about this is that the way it's propelled, it's a sail.
Yeah.
So instead of putting rockets or jets on this thing, they actually put a big sail. The sail is pretty good size. It's probably about the same size as the sunshade on the web, and it catches the kind of stream of particles from the sun, and it pushes it out there. So that's how this thing. There's a view of the sail right there.
Planetary Society's got a light sail out there too.
Yeah. So I thought these things were pretty cool. So anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting little piece of news. Here's another one related to this. This actually popped up, I think, today,
Yeah,
and this whole business has been kind of interesting and amusing to me for a while now. You probably know that a couple of years back, I guess this object, the Oumuamua, arrived in the solar system from somewhere else, and there was a big kind of debate about what exactly it is or is, I guess. Avi Loeb, who was I believe the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard, so obviously not a guy that just wandered in off the street, published a book which I have a copy of. I wasn't sure if I should actually buy this. It's like supporting crack pottery, I guess. But anyway, I did, and I read it, and it's very amusing. And I don't buy it for a minute that this thing is a probe from another world. But it's definitely something weird and unusual. Well, there's a plan. I think this is right now just the only thing that exists is an artist conception for this. But there's a plan to try to send a probe out and catch up with this thing, and it would also be a sail, which I thought was kind of fit in with this, this theme of looking at sails. And I think it would be super interesting to actually figure out this thing because, as Dr. Loeb points out in his book, there are a lot of really unusual things about this, and what exactly it's made out of is not clear at
For
all.
example, speeding up faster than it should have after it went past the sun.
And the behavior of it relative to the mass that could be calculated for it is odd, which suggests that it's made out of something very unusual. That it may be an ice of some kind, of maybe just a big flake of ice that or something like that. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting little news item. So I kind
We
of threw that
actually
in there.
turned in some of the confirmation data on it before it was even known that it was
Whatever it
our
is.
extrasolar system.
They when you see depictions of it, it looks like a big sort of cigar. I think the shape of it might actually be more wide and flat. Some of the later kind of information I've seen might suggest that it isn't
Not as
too
much Ferengi, but maybe more Romulan.
Yeah, it might look more like a Romulan ship,
Well, it was one of the things I said, because one thing I do is I send out, I get stuff from Sky and Earth and Sky, whatever, I send some of those out. And they had something about, and somebody has the idea that this was actually a huge piece of split off of something, kind of like a shard of something.
Yeah, I've seen that
Yeah,
too, like
yeah.
an ice that is
Well,
split off, like maybe some sort of weird icy exoplanet.
Possibly in another solar system where there was
Yes.
a big collision, and this was a chunk of that collision.
But there's been a couple of things that have come through from outside our solar system, and I think that would be, just from a science perspective, if you could get a sample of one of these things, it'd be super interesting because it would tell you a lot about the physical nature of the star that it came from. So anyway, I thought that was, I don't know if this will happen or not, but I thought it was really interesting. Another one I thought was kind of interesting, I follow the Southwest Research Institute, and they have found some evidence that there may be an internal ocean on Mimas, I believe is what this is, one of the smaller.
Or you could call it the Death Star.
The Death Star, yeah.
Well known for
Because it
that.
looks like, the Death Star from Star Wars. But the thing the thing about this, anytime you see water, you kind of think, well, that's one of the kind of conditions that would be supportive of life. So
And supporting of exploration.
and supporting them. So that's kind of what I always equate to this when I see water. I think, wow, biology. So that was another interesting news item. Threw in a couple of things about black holes. I guess Justin's not here. He's the black hole enthusiast. But there was this one which kind of, I think, threw a lot of people for a loop. where a black hole actually seems to be assisting in star formation. I guess the conventional wisdom was that it would work the other way around. But so that was kind of an interesting little piece of news that passed by.
It does have a tendency to throw its weight around.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, if,
Or its mass, I guess.
just because you get near it doesn't mean you're gonna get sucked in, you get thrown out and throw all kinds of debris out there.
Yeah. Anyway, it was kind of interesting. And another piece of black hole news that came through was mergers of the black holes. This was, I think, the first time they've spotted a merger between black holes that moved in a real unusual way. So
Sure, Justin could give you the whole history of it.
Okay.
yeah,
If you remember, a couple of years ago, we had the lady from KU do a presentation. It was either about gravity waves or something, but she said that some black holes have been spotted rotating around themselves 10,000 times a second. Remember that? I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah, and they've seen them merge, and that's a real,
Yeah, they're
yeah.
And that's, isn't that basically what a pulsar is? Not a black hole, but a neutron star that's rotating really fast, and so you're getting this beam of energy coming off of it.
Which on what?
For a pulsar?
Oh, yeah, there's,
Yeah.
and well, even the Crab Nebula has a something that rotates about 30 times a second. You can actually see that if you look through the eyepiece at this Crab Nebula and you get another light over here, light source that blinks on 30 times a second. Because of that variation, you can see it actually pulsate.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I guess when that first showed up, it kind of got a lot of attention. That was first discovered. So another piece of black hole news. Here's one that I really kind of like. This came on the geology page of all places, but this was interesting to me because I kind of like exoplanets. That's one of the things that really interests me. Mainly as an Earth scientist. One of the problems we always have in Earth science is we have an N of one. There's one Earth. This is kind of at least gives you, if you can kind of understand planets elsewhere, it at least gives you some context. And what was interesting to me about this was that they came to this conclusion that it's not necessary that biospheres might be unusual, but Earth-like biospheres, by which they mean a biosphere where the kind of fundamental biochemistry is this process of turning radiation and water into chemical energy, right? Photosynthesis. And it takes a certain amount of energy for that to work, right? It takes a photon with a certain amount of energy to kind of drive that process. And that particular amount of energy is obviously pretty common in the Earth system. And a lot of our solar radiation is in those wavelengths, right? Visible light is basically, most visible light is the kind that drives this. So what they were basically saying here was that a lot of the exoplanets, even the ones that seem somewhat Earth-like, that are not like these hot Jupiters or ones that are obviously not able to support a biosphere, at least the way we understand it, still wouldn't be able to necessarily support an Earth-like biosphere because they're just in a situation where there's not enough energy to drive the type of photosynthesis that is really the fundamental process here on Earth. And so you wouldn't expect to see that kind of biochemistry taking place. I suppose other types could. But I thought this was interesting and a little depressing, that there may not really be exactly another Earth out there. But, and if there is, it's probably already in use. So I don't think it's really available to us, but doubtful we could really get there very easily. But I thought that was kind of an interesting, something I had never really thought about, that there may be kind of an energetics limitations on what can form an Earth-like biosphere. Okay, so anyway, those were the kind of news items that I found interesting, and this is strictly my interest. So if you guys find other news items you want me to throw into I know Jan sends out a lot of these things pretty much every day, but if something you want to throw into a meeting or something, just let me know. I'd also talk a little bit about what's happening in the sky coming up in February. February will be a really good month for Mercury. Mercury is the only planet that's visible to the naked eye that I've never seen. And so I'm kind of hoping maybe this will be the time when I can finally go out and bag Mercury. There'll be a couple of pretty good days actually to see Mercury. One of them will be February the 10th when it'll be in the morning sky and it'll be at the highest point. It's still going to be relatively low on the horizon, but that'll be the highest point. Probably even an even better day might be February 16th when it reaches its greatest westward elongation. If you kind of look at the orbit, I put this little diagram of the orbit over here, and you can kind of see the elongations of its orbit. And this would be the greatest westward elongation, which means that the separation distance between the sun and the planet is, from our perspective, is the greatest. And so it makes it just a little easier to see because it's not in the glare of the sun. So the sun would be rising, it would stay out of the glare of it for a longer period of time. It might also be when it reaches its brightest point. So those would probably be pretty good days. Hopefully there'll be some clear skies, but you'll need to get up before sunrise because you'll need to be able to see it before sunrise. So anyway, Mercury, good month for that. It's also a pretty good month for conjunctions. There was a whole list when I went to the kind of calendar of events for this month. There's this whole list of conjunctions. I only put a couple of them out there. There's a Moon-Mars conjunction on February 12th, and there's a Moon-Venus-Mars on February the 27th. As I was looking at all these conjunctions, it sort of dawned on me that I kind of knew sort of conceptually what a conjunction is. It's like when things are close to one another, but I didn't really know exactly what was meant by a conjunction. And so I got curious about that and have to look up what a conjunction actually is. So I found this on the Earth Sky site. It's the instant which the right ascension on the sky dome is the same between two objects. And here's a little diagram that kind of illustrates this. These things sort of lined up together. So now, as a bonus of this being February being a conjunction month, I now know what a conjunction really is. So February 16th will be the snow moon, the full moon. It's called the snow moon, I think, because it's associated with the time of the year when there's a lot of snow. And I don't know if there'll be anything very special about this snow moon. I think last year or the year before, the snow moon came relatively early in the month, and it was also a super moon, so it looked big. This year, I don't think it is, but it'll be the snow moon on February 16th, which is also the day of the greatest westward elongation. So you can kind of do a double header on that one. In the morning, you can see the Mercury, and in the afternoon, you can see the snow. So Jan sent out a thing on one of her daily messages about Gemini, and I was kind of in need of things to talk about, so I decided maybe Gemini would be a good thing to talk about. So I thought we would just look a little bit at Gemini. Gemini, as a constellation, was one I had never really thought that much about, to be honest with you. You tend to think about the ones that have these real noteworthy objects in them, like Andromeda, as the cool galaxy and all that. Gemini was one that I never really thought about as having a lot of objects associated with it, but turns out it kind of does. One thing I did learn, by the way, when back earlier in my career, I had a lot of funding from NASA, and so I would go down to the NASA in the summers and spend some time on there. And I found out really by mistake something really interesting about NASA, which is this constellation is Gemini. This thing, which was one of the early manned spacecraft, is Gemini. And if you pronounce it Gemini, they will kind of rap you on the knuckles and tell you that's not how we say it. I think I saw one of those in a museum or something, and I was with a NASA person at the time. I said, "Ooh, that's a Gemini." And he said, "No, it isn't. It's a Gemini." So anyway, if you're ever at NASA, avoid this embarrassing error of mispronouncing what the Gemini spacecraft. I think that particular one was Gemini 8, but anyway. So here's a kind of a diagram of the Gemini constellation. As far as what's in this thing, first of all, where did the name come from? I always kind of like these little kind of mythological asides. You know, there's a lot of cool mythology associated with this fact. So Gemini, the brothers are Castor and Polydeuces, or Pollux. The story varies a little bit depending on where you see it. As I was looking through some of these sources of mythology, they're both definitely the sons of Zeus, who was a god, and Leda, who was the Spartan queen, who was a mortal. Depending on the version, either they're twins, which we kind of think about them that way, right? We refer to Gemini as the twins. Another version of it was that Castor's sister was Diana, who became the goddess of the hunt or something like that. And Polydeuces also had a sister whose name is escaping me. Do you remember? But anyway, whether or not they're actually twins or whether they're brothers but not twin brothers, I guess doesn't really matter.
The other way it's explained is that Queen Leda was the mother of Pollux, but some goddess or whatever was the mother of Castor, and that's why Castor was immortal and Pollux wasn't.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
And Pollux got killed, and Castor was so brokenhearted that they were both put up in the sky.
Oh, okay. Well, that's an even better story.
Yeah.
Apparently they were quite close, whether they were twins or brothers. They were quite close to one another. They were both kind of famed for their martial skills, especially in fencing and boxing. They actually accompanied Jason and the Argonauts on the search for the Golden Fleece. And at one point, one of the two of them actually engaged in a boxing match with some aggressive creature that saved the expedition, basically. So that's part of the mythology. As far as kind of where they are in the sky, it's my preferred way of finding it is, preferred way of finding anything, because I'm not real good at that sort of thing, is find something that and then go up and to the left or up and to the right or something like that. So for me, it's always find Orion, which is easy, right? Find the shoulder of Orion, right? Go up the club and make a left. and the two brightest stars are the stars that are named Castor and Pollux. Of course, the
interesting thing is that Castor's given the A
alpha,
estimation, and Pollux is actually brighter.
It's actually, yeah.
And they're both multiple star systems.
Yeah, and yep. If you look at their kind of location here, Alpha and Beta Geminorum, there's some kind of
the colors are a little different too. That's
they're really very different kinds of stars.
Mhm.
And so here's again, it's kind of a diagram of that. So there's Orion, there's the club right there.
And you can see the unicorn is down there too. See Monos up there. See if you go from Betelgeuse across, you go right across the unicorn.
Monoceros. So that's where
Where
the NEA Explorer is headed. Or the
the
NEA Scout.
It's pretty low down, so it may be heading a little lower.
Yeah. So those are obviously the two most well-known stars. There are a couple pretty cool nebula in here. This one is one that is kind of interesting because it's got it's in the NGC catalog, and it's got two numbers. And it's two distinct objects that are just kind of together, basically. So NGC 2371 and 72, two distinctly separate components of the same thing. And this one actually made the Royal Astronomical Society's catalog of the most interesting or finest, I guess, it's a very British term, the finest NGC objects list. There's actually a lot better pictures of it than that out there. I should have probably found a better one, but this is a planetary nebula, so this is what's left over when a star kind of expands and then contracts. A few other nebula. Eskimo Nebula, which is probably a name that's on a little bit of thin ice, no pun intended these days. But it's a pretty interesting looking thing. I think I've actually seen this one before. It's not easy to see with a telescope, but you can find it.
It's very
It's-
easy, very easy to photograph.
Yeah, but it's apparently supposed to look like a face with a big furry parka around it,
Right.
and that's how it got this particular name. This is the Jellyfish Nebula, which I have no idea. It doesn't look like a jellyfish to me necessarily, but I don't know.
Well, when they come up with those things, I figured you gotta realize it was probably named by people who've been up all night.
Yeah,
Had 40 tons of coffee, and so things.
It's the best they
like-
could do at that time.
well, that and they probably we have to come up with another name. What are we going to do this time? And, so yeah, they're probably digging in a little bit. And then there's the Medusa Nebula, which, as far as I know, it doesn't have a catalog number. I was looking around for it. But these are some of the more well-known nebulae that are in Gemini. And it's probably also pretty well known for its star clusters. There's several of them that are actually kind of right near each other. This is the largest one, Messier 35. NGC 2158 is much smaller, but I think actually a lot more interesting looking because it's this kind of tightly packed star cluster. Okay, so anyway, that was some of the kind of highlights of Gemini. So I don't know. February struck me as being a little bit of a slow month, but maybe March will be a little more interesting. Okay, anybody want to add anything? I don't know.
Members' night is April 2nd.
Okay.
We don't do much during the winter months. I mean, we
Yeah.
kind of leave people to their own resources at that point, because you never know if
No.
you're gonna get a warm enough night to do anything, you know. So, and we do very little out there during the first 3 months of the year. About a part.
Well, if there's any kind of snow. It's not good to get there.
And I will tell you, if you go out to Fort Point, there is a line of electrical boxes on the outside. Even if nobody else is around, you can plug into them. And you get the kind of a 50-foot extension cord or so. You can go to the observing pad from the wall and have the power.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was software and computing resources. And as I said, I had, I kind of set out, when I set out on this, I thought this is going to be easy because there's so much. And then I realized after about a day or so that this is going to be hard because there's so much. But I thought I would focus this a little bit on resources that are available for little or no cost. And there was a number of reasons for that. One of them is that I like to use free and open source software. I use a lot of it in my research, and I've come to use it for a variety of reasons. One of which is it's a lot easier on the budget. Proprietary software, particularly, or commercial software, particularly of the type that we use in a lot of research, is extremely expensive. And it's quite common to be able to find equivalents that are either free or open source or both that will do the job. And in most cases, not always, but in most cases, they are free in the sense of, free beer. There's actually, free software has kind of two meanings, basically. Free is in air, or free is in beer, and free is in speech. And it turns out that there's a lot of good stuff that's both. And I thought maybe I would just spend a little bit of time kind of running through a few of the things that you can
Is that
find.
a picture of you when you were little?
No, it isn't actually. This is the picture of, apparently it's a picture of Russell Gannett's son. So anyway, I threw this in there because this is not a new topic as far as, software for doing astronomy, particularly for non-professionals. Goes back quite a ways. And the use of, computing resources for astronomy, amateur astronomy particularly, also goes back. And I think the intertwining of those two things probably comes about because a lot of the people who are pretty active, amateurs were also people with a lot of technical background. And so we're able to do these kinds of things. So here's an old picture. This is probably, I would guess, probably from the late 70s.
Is that a Commodore 64?
No, that's even older than that.
Yeah.
This is the
Well,
infamous.
Look at the phone receiver on
Yeah.
it, what you call it, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
this thing was the infamous Radio Shack TRS-80,
TRS-80,
which was also
Trash
sometimes
80.
referred to as the Trash 80. I almost bought one of these when I was in high school. They were pretty expensive. They were, I don't know, about $600, which back in 1978 was,
I used
far more money than they just now.
I used it, Texas Instruments 99A.
Oh, is that little one that was, oh God, yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, anyway, so this was, this was probably one of the very first personal computers that you could buy that you didn't have to actually build yourself, like put together from a kit. Was sold by Radio Shack, which I guess is a company that doesn't exist anymore. And by the time you bought all these parts to it, the drives and all that sort of thing, notice the old modem, right? The old transducer modem that you put your phone on, which not only does modems look different, but phones look pretty different now too.
Those are probably 128K
Yeah.
hard drive or
Probably,
whatever.
or even that.
Floppy disk.
Yeah, they might have been, not only when they might have been floppy drives, but they might have been the 8-inch
Yeah.
floppy drive, which were the original floppy disks. The old flexible disks came in flippy disks and floppy disks.
And then they went to 5 1/4.
And then they went to 5 1/4 and then to 3 1/2. And, now, I don't know. I found an old 3 1/2 inch disc in my desk the other day when I was rooting around it.
There's a bunch of them at the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
I threw a lot away, but there's still some left.
But anyway, if you wanted to do this kind of work, and I threw in the picture of the little kid over there looking through, this was a group that was one of the first non-professional groups doing photometry, and they called Fairborn Observatory.
Yep.
They had a Fairborn Observatory in the Chicago area, and then they had a branch in like Phoenix or something like that. And they were doing photometry with photoelectric photometers. So this was not an imager. This is just a little, and this was similar to some of the things professional astronomers were using. And if you wanted to do any kind of data collection or data analysis, you pretty much had to write your own code to do that with. There really wasn't anything available. So, the idea of people putting together software and making it available to a user community goes back a long, long way. And of course, the information got out about how to do this. So a couple of books that came out at the time. This one came out in the 80s. This guy, Russell Gennett, was the founder of that Fairborn Observatory. This is his son. So
I have that book if anybody wants to read it.
I used to have a copy of it. I don't know what happened to it, but and there's been other books that you can kind of see the progress over here. We go from really old computer to more up to date kind of thing. But the same basic problem is out there is what do you do for software for these things? And so, as with almost any field of endeavor, if there's a opening for some kind of professional activity, someone will fill that void. So there's certainly a lot of commercial software that's become available that kind of includes things that are for the professional community, but also for the amateur community as well. This is one, I think we have this one at PowerPoint, right? The Sky Suite.
We have the Sky 6.
And these are probably pretty good. I don't know. I guess every once in a while hear some cursing at them, but these are solid. But the thing about these is they're not really very cheap. If you look at these prices down here, those are.
And they've changed them now. I mean, it used to be they were kind of expensive, but now you only have, and they rent it to you yearly.
So it's like a subscription.
So you've got to re-up the subscription every year.
And that's actually becoming a lot more common with a lot of software of this type. So this was one of the ones. This is an ad for another one, Quartet Tria. This was in an astronomy magazine. This is an image processing program that you might use to, and I think it does some of the kind of astrometric types of analysis as well. But again, same thing. This is not a not a king's ransom, but it's not exactly a trivial amount of money either. And people always say you get what you pay for, but the corollary of that is also true. You pay for what you get. And I've found that in a lot of cases, you can find things that are equivalent in their capability, and they fall into this free and open source software. So in a way, this is a little bit of a kind of an ad for free and open source software. But I also think this is a way for those of us who have an interest in this but are not deep pocketed to be able to do a lot of these kinds of things. So first of all, I thought, what do we mean by free and open source software? And there's always a little bit of confusion about this. First of all, there's an assumption sometimes that free and open source means free in the sense of no charge, and that's not necessarily always true. So it doesn't always mean free of charge. One of the early advocates of free and open source software, a guy named Richard Stallman, used to say that it was free as in speech, not free as in beer. Or free as in lunch. So you can expect it to be follow this kind of free software freedoms, which tells you that you're free to run it, that you're free to study it. If it's open source, which means that the source code is available, you're also free to modify it if you so desire. The one thing that you're typically not free to do is sell it. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder. I can struggle through a little bit of coding, and my best language was Fortran, which gives you some idea of my vintage. So I have no desire to mess around with the code, but I like the idea of being able to use these in a lot of cases because they also kind of bypass a lot of the problems that you sometimes run into with commercial software, which is that you're usually buying from a company that may not always necessarily be that responsive to your needs. So anyway, this is one of the reasons why I've kind of become an advocate for using free and open source. The other reason I like them is they tend to be a little more cross-platform in a lot of cases. Sellers of commercial software, and I have nothing against that. I'm pretty much a capitalist at heart, so I like to see people making money in a market. But typically they're trying to make money, so they're trying to sell for the most, or they're trying to write for the most common platforms. And I'm not a Windows user. You can probably tell every time I come in here and struggle with putting stuff on the screen. I'm also not a Mac user. I prefer Linux, and that kind of puts you into the world of FOSS software because there's not a lot of commercial software that's written for Linux. And in most cases, and I think when I selected the little examples I'm going to show here, all of them were things that are cross-platform, that it's possible to run them on all three of the major operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. You might have to work a little harder sometimes to use them on some of these platforms, but and I know, Russ, you probably have a take on this as well, being a kind of tech guru, but I have found that using Linux, I've used it for probably about 10 years now, maybe a little longer. It's kind of a lot easier to use, partially because it's gotten to be more popular. But anyway, there is often a little bit more of a learning curve with it, but it opens up a lot of software avenues for you. So here's a thing from a Linux Link site, a place that kind of gathers information about all this. And they basically rated the best free software. And this is free in both senses. So here's a bunch of programs that some of you that probably heard these. Stellarium is one that we use a lot. It's a more of a planetarium one. Astro Image J is one I've gotten to be a little bit familiar with because it's used a lot for photometric analysis and particularly of the exoplanet. People are doing photometry for exoplanet transit timings and things like that. This has become a pretty commonly used tool for that. Let's look at SkyChart here, and then K-Stars is one that we've used a little bit out of Farpoint to control some of the telescopes. So I thought I would just talk about a few of these, and I just picked ones that I thought were particularly easy. So first of all, look at a few of the kind of sky cartography or planetarium software. I did include links on these, by the way, if you want to, I thought I did. Oh yeah, here's the link. So if you want, we can post this presentation and you can follow these links if you want to follow up on where you find some of these. And Stellarium is a pretty widely used open source planetarium program. This is one that we use in meetings a lot. People use it within the meeting. It's available to run on all of the 3 major operating systems. It's really easy to use. It's kind of entertaining. I play around with it a lot of times just for the fun of it, but it's also kind of useful. One of the things that it's really used for is planning observational sessions. If you want to, for example, if you're planning a photographic session, this will tell you when things are in a sufficient position to be able to image them well. Pretty easy to use. I've never really had any problems with it. It does actually have some telescope capability built into it, but I've never used it for that.
Oh, I've used it on my scope actually and done pretty good with it. It actually does a pretty good job. The only problem is it doesn't coordinate imaging with it as easily.
Yeah, it just moves.
But
It just moves the scope, right?
Yeah.
And then you'd have to have separate.
Well, it moves the scope, keeps track of where you're at, and shows you, magnified views of what you're looking at, and really it does most of the other things that most planetarium software does.
Yeah.
It's pretty open. I mean, it does a lot.
Celestia is kind of similar, I guess, runs on all 3 of these, but all 3 of the operating systems. But it's a 3D visualizer. This is one I hadn't heard of until I actually started to kind of do the little research for this presentation. And you can actually create these 3D views of what the perspective might be in space. So I thought this was a pretty interesting one. I haven't really had much of a chance to work with it yet, so I can't give a lot of detail about it. But it's probably not as practically useful as Stellarium is. I don't know if you could, for example, use it. Have you used this one?
I have used it a couple of times, but yeah, I didn't find it as useful. I mean, I think it's way more popular than Stellarium, and people just like to see, like, what's it look like if I'm standing on Mars or something,
Yeah.
right?
And that's the draw of it, I think, is that Stellarium only assumes you're on Earth, and only on Earth. Celestia, you can be on Mars, and I think it's kind of fun, but as far as it being more of a practically useful tool, it's probably less so than Stellarium.
It's a public presentation type thing.
I could
That's where it comes in. There was a really old version that you could say, okay, what does the Earth look like from Mars right now? All that kind of stuff. And that's one thing that, general public, man, they just glom onto that.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
can see where
so-
it'd be
So
really.
it's nice for that, kind of a show and telly type thing.
I can see where it'd be really cool for that.
Mhm.
This is another one that is kind of, I kind of lumped it in with the planetariums and the sky cartography, but it's a little more to it than that. SkyChart, I think it's originally in French, carte de C. I don't know, my French is.
I've also used that one in operating telescope.
Yeah, this is one that you can use as a planetarium, sky cartography program, but also you can use it to run the telescopes. And the thing that I see this one used a lot for, see discussed a lot, is observation session planning. This one is particularly good at making sky charts. So if you want to make a sky chart for an observation, to plan observations, this one is pretty good with that. And like all these others, keeps tracks of, the planets, asteroids, with current comets, all those sorts of things. So it'll allow you to keep track of objects in the sky. But it's the kind of charting capability that I see particularly emphasized with this one. Anybody else use this one?
Yeah, I'm gonna
Other than Gary?
I've used it just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And K-stars, which again is kind of getting into, I think it's a little, this one definitely has the planetarium function, but there's way more to it than that. This was one you probably could, spend quite a lot of time, Russ, talking about. But this is one that we're using a little bit out of Farpoint to run a couple of the telescopes. And this one, again, contains all kinds of capability to the point where I don't know if you really want to just put it in any one category. It has the planetarium stuff. This planetarium stuff, I think, is a little less snazzy than some of these other ones. But, it's telescope control and pointing, camera control. You can actually control most cameras with it. Guiding has capability to guide if you have a camera that's equipped with a guiding component. It has a simulation capability. You can actually act as if you're running a telescope without one actually attached. I don't know, what else? What else does it do? It has an amazing set of
Yeah,
capabilities.
focus, plate solve.
Yeah.
Just integrate with that.
I think it'll even move a dome.
Yeah, it'll move, and it'll control both a dome and a roll-off. So if you want to set it to, point your dome or roll off your roof, it'll do all that. My experience with this is that it's obviously very capable, almost to the point sometimes where it's too much. This one is like, driving it. It's for me, it's like, going from, driving a Toyota to driving a Ferrari or something. There's just a lot of power there that I'm not quite sure what to do with sometimes. But I really like this. And the other thing that's really nice about K-stars, at least from my perspective, is that it's written to natively run in Linux. So it's actually part of this KDE education project, which is a Linux thing. So I like that part about it a lot. And it's also, free in all the senses. And the people that write this are pretty responsive, aren't they, to feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like a lot of things, if you're having a problem with it, it's kind of your problem. So
Yeah, and that's something I'll get into here later, what the downside of a lot of these sort of open source things are.
but they might help you while you're trying to figure it out. So
Yeah. So anyway, those are ones I kind of lumped in as Planetarium software, although I think, there's much more to it than that. I thought I'd also just throw in a few things about astronomical image processing and image analysis and astrophotography. I like these. I threw these in there because a lot of the research work I do in my day job involves image processing of images of the ground. So I'm always sort of interested in how I can generalize that to images of other types as well. So here was one that I thought was pretty interesting. This is called Cyril. It's an astronomical image processing tool. Again, kind of runs natively in several different operating systems. And this is one that is oriented towards, this would probably be a pretty good one for astrophotography because it can do things like manage your dark and flat images and kind of do that sort of calibration that you need to do. It also has some astrometric capabilities, although I didn't really get too far into that. I didn't know anything about this one until a few days ago when I was kind of doing the research for all this. So I downloaded it and played with it a little bit. And it also seems to me to be really good at managing your collections. It's really good at kind of keeping track of all your images. So this is one I thought was kind of interesting. Anybody use this one?
This is pretty much all I use for all my astrophotography.
Yeah. So would you say this one is the kind of the
Yeah, so it
The one?
could do all the stacking and the pre-processing of your images. What I really like about it is it actually has a scripting language for it, which you don't have to really know how to write scripts, but you can use scripts that are already there or yours. So if you have a similar workflow, you could just you could just put all your files into the right spots and then run the script, and then out comes your nice image. That's already has like 100 stacks, already the darks and the flats and all that taken out, and you could do more processing on it.
Does scripting language also do like, I don't know, batch processing if you had a bunch of images that you wanted to
Yeah,
have
that's what it
different
does.
things, Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one I think would be.
I've made some videos actually of how to do processing with this.
Oh, good.
If it goes out with this link, I could post that if anyone's
Yeah,
interested.
that'd probably be useful. This is probably a tool that would be pretty useful for astrophotography. This is one that's not really necessarily for astrophotography, but it's one that I actually end up using quite a bit. This is called GIMP. It stands for New Image Manipulation Program or something like that. This is sort of, I got into this one originally because I was told that it's sort of an open source version of like Adobe Illustrator. Turns out that that's not exactly accurate, but it's kind of like that. Adobe is Photoshop. Is used for kind of photographic analysis. This is pretty simple. This does a lot of the same things, but this is completely FOSS software, free and open source. This GNU thing is kind of a name for that, right? So I actually use this one quite a bit for taking images of leaves. Part of what I do is I have to be able to measure how much carbon is in a leaf. So I use this one to figure out the areas of the leaves. So, but I see a lot of people using this one for probably more for cosmetic manipulation of photos, working with the color balances and that sort of thing. Is this one you've ever worked with?
It's usually what I go in as one of the last steps. So
And-
after I'm done with Cyril, then
And then just
bring
kind
it
of
in this one.
polish it up a little bit. Yeah. So this is another one that probably would be good to have in the toolkit for photographers. This is Astro Image J. I've taken a couple of courses from the AAVSO that delve pretty heavily into this one. This is actually a plugin. There's a program called Image J, which actually its provenance was it was developed at the National Institutes of Health for people who wanted to manipulate medical images. And a group at the University of Louisville wrote a plugin for analyzing astronomical images, and particularly for doing photometric analysis and then modeling of exoplanet transits. And so this one is used quite a lot for this exoplanet. And so this is an exoplanet transit right here. This is actually one from a course that I took, and the course project basically was to do this exoplanet transit. So this is WASP 12, and you can use it for all sky and differential photometry as well. So if you want to measure the magnitudes of things, it's pretty effective for that. It's a kind of a fussy piece of software, which a lot of these things are. It was written by a group of scientists, so it's written with that kind of an audience in mind. But I thought it was really pretty powerful. I didn't think it was as good for just basic photometry as the AAVSO tools are, but the exoplanet stuff I thought was really pretty interesting. And again, this is an open source thing. If you want to write your own plugins for it and you're capable of doing that, you certainly can. This one was one that was kind of a real bare bones, but this is Adela, has this very kind of bare bones interface. But what was cool about this one was you can do animations with it. This one you've used. So if you want to do kind of an animated series of photographs or something, this will work for that. So this is where you can kind of go to find this one. Looks pretty bland, but apparently it gets a lot of attention because it's of this animation capability. So this is, if you're kind of interested in following up a little bit more on this is actually a free world encyclopedia for astronomy software, free Astro. Sounds like something that, from the Jetsons, right? Wasn't Astro their dog? So, if you were freeing Astro. But anyway, a lot of what I found in here, I got this, but this has just got tons and tons of stuff, and even software for things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and some of these little computers like that. And they're the hosts for the Cyril project, which is kind of how I made my way to this. So you've probably seen this site before quite a bit. Okay, so anyway, so yeah, there's obviously a lot of stuff out there. This is barely a scratch on the scratch. This is hardly a drop in the bucket, to be honest with you. But these are the ones that I thought might be good starting places for people who are wanting to kind of get into this. It is good though to kind of go into this with your eyes open. At least that's what I've always found with free and open source software. There's some really good stuff about it, and there's some stuff about it that makes it a little more difficult. The good stuff is that it's free in one sense and often free in both senses. It's both free as in open to change and also free of charge. A lot of times there's really wider range of applications. You can get some really specialized stuff that there's probably not much of a commercial market for, but there is enough for interested parties to develop software. Often supports more platforms. I know, things tend to be pretty Windows centric and Mac centric, and you get more OS support. And again, it's free. And free is my favorite price, so I am attracted to that. But you also have to be aware of what's not so good about this. And probably the most important thing to be aware of is that there's rarely ever support available for these the way it's available for a commercial piece of software. There is a lot of times a user community that you can sometimes get support from. For example, K-Stars, there's tons of videos on how it works. But a lot of my experience with free software is that that you can often communicate directly with the people that write it, but you're communicating directly with the people that write it. And they often have an understanding of what they're doing that goes way beyond my capability. So, a lot of times I get an answer that's like, oh, you just need to, do this and that and this. And I'm like, well, what's this? What's that? What's this?
Yeah.
That can be a little frustrating. I mean, I've spent quite a few days pounding my head against my desk trying to solve this problem in other software contexts. So unless you got a really soft desk or a really hard head, you probably want to kind of go into this with your eyes open. A lot of times these can be buggy. They don't get a lot of the same quality control that commercial software gets. That said, I've encountered more than my share of pretty egregious bugs in commercial software too. So this is not something that is strictly limited to the FOSS. And a lot of times the user interfaces are crude or rudimentary. Commercial software is designed to be used by a wider range of people with a lot of different skills. For software like, for example, the kinds that we would be using, there's often an assumption, maybe not even an explicit assumption, that you as a user know what you're doing. And in a lot of cases, that's true, right? People that are attracted to hobbies like this are often people with particular technical savvy. But I've found that in my case, it's not always true. You know, so I've run into some cases where I can't, it's not that I can't, it's not that the software won't do what I want it to do. It's just I can't figure out how to get there. And so you got to be kind of prepared to work a little harder, I think, which keeps your brain in good shape too. It's kind of a mental exercise. But so these are the kinds of things you probably want to sort of take into account if you're going to start adopting some of these. But in general, I have personally found that kind of using these sort of alternative software sources can really be beneficial. So
I will say one thing too, on the last slide there, where support is often not available. Sometimes even with commercial software, support's available, but it's an extra charge.
Right. And that's something that, again, not to get up on the soapbox too much, but I will. When a lot of places went from a model of purchase, right, where you buy a package to a model of subscription, not only are you on the hook for, writing a check every year, but if you want the support to continue, that's another charge. There's cases like in my own personal research work, we use a couple of very expensive pieces of software that are subscription services and require us to pony up a pretty significant amount of money every year just to continue to use them and get supported by them. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly kind of pros and cons to all these things.
So when you use free software at your work, for example, in some of your research projects, don't you have to have some sort of proof that the software is actually doing what it says it does accurately?
Yeah.
I mean, how is that done? Like we use Astrometrica, which is kind of free, but
A whole
it's so
$25.
I should probably included that.
it's so well established that it's accurate.
Yeah.
But when some of this stuff comes out and at your work, what's the process on that?
Well, in my case, if it's my research work, I know what the answer should be. So if it's telling me something that's obviously wrong, then yeah. I mean, there's a really good example. This is actually not free software. This is Microsoft. Microsoft had built, has statistical analysis built into their spreadsheet. And a lot of the algorithms they had in there were just wrong, how they were calculating some of these things. And I don't know if they've ever really fixed that. But if you were trying to do statistical analysis with, whatever that is, Excel, it was wrong. It was just giving you wrong answers. And if you didn't understand what the right answer should be, you probably never would have caught it. Yeah. So I guess in my case, I guess I know enough about what the answer should be that if I see something I know is wrong.
But some of that free software doesn't come with some sort of certification or peer review process or anything?
No, not really.
I would think that if you're spending millions of dollars on government grants, you're using free software, that you have to kind of.
I don't know. They like it. They figure it's cost effective.
I mean, you talk about peer review. The idea behind this is that you have lots of people that are looking at the code and they're reviewing the code. So if someone finds the issue, it could be reported. And you could write, and I don't know, you could also write tests that test that the software works correctly if you're like programmers. And a lot of times, depending on what software it is, even if it's a commercial one, hopefully they would write tests to check that it has the correct answers. So whatever you're looking into, you could see if it has maybe if they have a development process that has the controls that you want for your project.
And I know for a lot of the stuff that we do, we have benchmarks. We give it a problem that we already know the answer to, and
Test it that way.
Yeah, and like Chris said, a lot of it does get essentially peer reviewed because it goes out to a user community And again, a lot of times the user communities on this are really savvy user communities, and if there's a problem, they'll find it.
Yeah.
So that's all I got.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so my usual plea. Anybody want to give a presentation next month? Yeah.
Way to intimidate everybody, I guess.
Did you say the lady you had set up, she wasn't gonna be able to present? She had some,
Oh, I had been in touch, well, that's a whole different story. That reminds me, by the way, though, I guess this is probably more of a question for the board, but I was contacted by one of our former speakers about that. And I don't know, any of those of you that are on the board, I guess that's gonna be on the agenda for the meeting this Sunday?
That, you mean the thing out in Colby, Kansas, that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is on the board agenda, isn't it?
Okay.
Colby's a long way out there.
That's
Yeah.
your bunnies.
Mark says good
You
night.
could see mountains.
Who says good night?
Mark.
Okay. Good night, Mark.
was it just him and I on the
I think maybe another person.
one more?
Okay, anything else? Anybody want to add anything? Again, I might circulate a plea at some point if anybody wants to step up, and I know we.
Or even if people have an idea for something they'd like somebody to do one on. You
Yeah,
can't do it yourself. If you got some ideas, that helps.
Yeah, more of a topic.
yeah, it's always kind of fun for me to do these because I usually learn something along the way, but I also kind of feel like I hope I'm getting this right, you know?
Have you done astrophotography before?
I've done a lot of photography and
Mhm.
I have a very technical background, so that piece of it doesn't worry me, but I have not done astrophotography.
Well,
Picking up on the language of stacking and
Russ has got a great